Hello, Mrs. Wright's fourth grade. How are you today? I hope you're doing well. I know it seems like it's been forever since I've seen you. I hope you enjoyed last week's lessons with poetry and the Poetry Choice Board, and maybe you got to meet Abraham Lincoln because he stopped by for a little visit. Anyway, today I'm going to read 3 chapters, 25, 26, and 27. So it might take a little bit longer, as you have seen in the past, but I hope you're sticking with it and listening for story time. So let's get right to it and see what is happening with Homer. Okay? Chapter 25 is called See the Elephant and Die. When I was 9 years old, Harold snuck me into the state fair in Skowhegan. I say snuck because old Squint forbade us going on account of the evil influences common at the fairs. Meaning, I guess, that folks have fun and that can't be good, not so far as Squint is concerned. In his opinions, humans were best when miserable, and so he had worked at being miserable his whole life, and in his generous way tried to make as many other people miserable as possible. The Skowhegan Fairgrounds begin some distance away. Being some distance away, Harold persuaded one of the Pine Swamp farmers to carry us there in the back of a vegetable cart. Wouldn't you know, the cart threw a wheel and we ended up walking most of the 20 miles. That's a long way. I kept wanting to turn back on account of my feet hurting, but Harold wouldn't let me give up. When we got there, it was worth it. I'd never seen so many people in one place. Most every tent and booth had food for sale. Fried dough with sugar frosting and hot donuts and cinnamon sprinkles and roast beef and chicken wings and pickled eel and herring and sugared this and honeyed that. And even though we didn't have money, we ate our fill of what others left behind. Ate so much I got sick, but I didn't care. I kept right on eating. There was harness racing around the big dirt track with folks screaming and waving tickets, and an exhibition of fine carriages and farm equipment and draft horses hauling tons of stone from the quarry and prize livestock, and late at night a special tent for people to go in and see a show. That's where I first smelled what I shouldn't be smelling, and that was whiskey. We were forbidden to enter, of course. Being boys and stationing ourselves outside, we saw what the people were doing. That's where I learned that that stuff makes men stupid at the Skowhegan Fair. Makes men stupid in New Jersey too, draining their bottles of medicine like it was water and they were dying of thirst. They stand swaying, others falling to their knees, some laughing at nothing, others weeping for their mothers and sick from home. It don't seem right to me doing this to the soldiers, but Professor Fleabottom says I must get used to it if I have any hope of finding Harold. These boys, every last one of them, they're all replacements. Do you know what replacements are? He asks me. When I shake my head, he says, it means that in a few weeks they will take the place of those who have died in battle from disease, and many of them will perish too. This elixir gives them the courage, if only for a while. But some are sick, sir. He shrugs. They'll be sick on the battlefield, too. War is an awful thing, Homer, and this is just what it is. We serve a purpose, whether you know it or not. Yes, sir. Tonight they saw the amazing pig boy and got a little elixir. Before the summer is over, they'll have seen the elephant, and many will see the grave. Yes, sir, I say. Seeing the elephant is soldier talk for fighting in a battle. I'm praying Harold never sees the elephant. We hit the road for 2 long weeks, each day putting miles of dust between us, and every night setting up not far from some army encampment or other, and then packing up and fleeing when the show is over. Sometimes I ride with the professor or Minnie, other times with the jugglers. The jugglers, Bernard and Talleyrand, that's their real names. At first, seem full of jokes and pranking, but after a while I come to understand they're worried that they'll be swept up in the draft for the war if they stay in one place too long. Nothing to fear, brother, says Byrne, as we plod along the road heading south. The army gets us. We'll juggle cannonballs or catch bullets with our teeth. More likely in our brains, says Tally, rolling his eyes. We have brains, says Byrne. Small ones, says Tally. Not smart enough to think, just dumb enough to juggle. Tally don't only juggle, but he's also the caravan cook, and a mighty good one, too. He can cook potatoes 6 different ways and fry up chicken in a deep iron skillet, and he makes a thing called whomper that's like beef stew inside a crust. My favorite, though, is egg, sausage, and biscuits. That one's good not only for breakfast, but any time of day or night. One time, the brothers having a hankering for a late night snack of pork chops, and Tally asked would I mind giving up one of those little pigs that were in my crate. Over my dead body, I tell him, my ears getting hot. Would you fry up Bernard just because you were hungry? You leave my friends alone. Byrne chuckles and shakes his head. Told you he's thinking like a pig. That's why he's so convincing. That and the tail, says Tally. Professor Fleabottom proves to be as good as his word, asking after Harold every time at every army encampment we visit, and trying to determine where he might be posted. Most of the soldiers we meet are from New Jersey and New York, but twice we come upon troops intended for the Maine regiment. Much to my disappointment, my brother is not among them. A grisly-looking Portland-born sergeant tells us that many of the new recruits are promised to the 20th Maine to replace those felled by an outbreak of smallpox. He spits out about a quarter of tobacco juice in one squirt, wipes his beard with his sleeve. After beating the Union at Chancellorsville, Lee has left Virginia and headed north. He says, that's what we hear. Nobody's telling us nothing, of course, so it's mostly rumor and lies. Indeed, the professor says, sounding interested. General Lee comes north? Robert E. Lee is the wily old Confederate general that's been winning most of the battles ever since the war started, and even the toughest Union men speak of him with respect. The sergeant squints at the professor. Could be, he says. What makes you so curious? Wouldn't happen to be spying, would you? The professor laughs and slaps his knee. Good one, sir. I may be hanged for a rascal, but never a spy. No, 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 sir. Our curiosity is perfectly innocent. We ask because this orphan boy is looking for his brother, claims he was illegally sold into the army at the tender age of 17. Was he now? The sergeant studies me with squinty eyes. Yes, sir. My uncle said that he was 20 and swore him in for replacement and kept the money. That swear was a dirty lie. Harold ain't but 17. And what do you aim to do, little fella, supposing you find him? Be sworn in? You yourself? I don't know, I admit, but find him I must. The sergeant gives a suspicious glance to the professor, then jerks his chin at me. Try Pennsylvania, vicinity of the Potomac River. Any men mustered in that last few months, that's likely where they'll send them, in preparation for the battles to come, and so on. Excuse me. And son? Yes, sir. Keep your head down. Soon enough, the air will be thick with lead. That night, I can't sleep for worrying about Harold. He's so strong and brave, they'll probably give him a flag to carry into battle. First thing those Confederates will see is Harold coming over the hill, waving the stars and stripes, and every secessionist rifle will have eyes for him. I imagine General Robert E. Lee on his gray horse shooting at Harold with his fancy silver pistol, and Harold falling tangled up in the flag. I imagine Harold bleeding on the ground, his face getting paler and paler, and then Harold dies. That's when I get up from my little bunk in the last wagon and climb out into the night, wanting some cool air to clear my head. It's stupid to torment myself with visions of what might happen to my brother when he gets to the war. Nothing to be done but to keep on searching as our little caravan heads west to Pennsylvania. Like the old sergeant said, find the Maine regiment and explain to the generals that they've got the wrong boy and that they must give me back my big brother before something bad happens. In a few yards from the wagon, doing my business behind a big rock, when the riders come out when the rider comes out of the night. Man on a black horse. He's got the horse's hooves wrapped in rags to muffle the sound, and at first I think he must be here to rob us. Why else sneak up on us through the darkness, quietest part of the night? I'm about ready to shout out a warning to the others when Professor Fleabottom slips out of the wagon. He's wearing a dark cloak that blends him into the darkness, and something about the way he moves says he's all business. The professor meets up with the man on the horse. They speak for a few minutes, but so low I can't hear nothing but a murmur. Then Professor Fleabottom looks around and makes sure nobody's watching. He don't see me peeking around the rock, and he reaches into the dark cloak and takes out a leather satchel, the kind that carries mail or dispatches. The professor hands the satchel to the man on the black horse. The man gives him a quick salute and wheels the horse away, vanishing silently into the night. Now, I got 2 reasons not to sleep. Harold and whatever the professor is up to, sneaking around under the cover of darkness. Chapter 26. The Terrible Black Wagons. About the only thing I recall about our dear mother dying is the coffin. How it smelled of pine and camphor, and how small it was. How was our dear mother to sleep in such a narrow space? That worried me so much that I could not sleep or eat until Harold explained that our dear mother was herself now in heaven and had left behind a pale remnant that must be buried in the earth. The pine box would suffice. Still, I didn't understand. What did he mean by remnant? A thing left behind, he told me. How do you know? I asked him. He says, Mother told me herself just before she passed. She said we must not grieve over her poor body because it is only a remnant and her mortal soul has flown off to heaven. She will have all the room she needs there. Homer, you are not to worry. I was only 4 at the time, which means Harold was only 9, but he comforted me better than any grown-up, and I was able to get sleep so long as it was next to him, knowing he would always be there. What makes me think of that little pine box, and Harold too, the terrible black wagons we meet upon the road, not far from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They are like big hayrick wagons, without the hay, drawn by 4 horses, and the whole of each wagon is swaddled in black cloth and marked with the Union emblem. Under the cloth, peeking out here and there, are stacks of cheap pine coffins. The professor pulls our little caravan over to let the death wagons pass and bids us to stand with our hats off and our heads bowed as a sign of respect. As the last wagon goes by, it throws a spoke and nearly overturns. The professor leaps down to offer his assistance and puts Tally and Byrne to work repairing the wheel while he entertains the driver with his fine talk. A splendid job you're doing here, bringing comfort to the bereaved, he says. How is it that these men were not buried on the battlefield? Well, most are, of course, the driver says, wiping his sweaty brow with a soiled hanky. These poor brave soldiers died of their wounds sometime after the battle and are to return to their homes. And what battle was that? The professor wants to know. We hear only dribs and drabs of the war. Skirmishes, mostly, the driver says. The armies are maneuvering, trying to get position. Near the Potomac, I suppose. The driver shakes his head wearily. West of the river. Lee has been harassing Harrisburg of late. The Union sends its men to find him, and this is how they return. Shot to pieces and dying. Some of their wounds more from sickness and fever. It's a sad business. Very sad, says the professor. Tell me, sir, would a mild tonic help? A little pick-me-up? He means his elixir, and the driver readily accepts. As he sips from the bottle, the driver becomes even more talkative, and he and the professor discuss the state of the war. It seems that after the triumph of Chancellorsville, the Confederate forces have indeed come north as rumored, invading Pennsylvania and looking to put a bayonet through the heart of the Union Army. They say if Lee wins one more battle, the war will be over and the South will triumph. Surely not, the professor says, looking much distressed. Our General Hooker can fight, can he not? Hooker? The driver gives him an odd look as he takes another swig of the elixir. Have you not heard? Fighting Joe Hooker has resigned in despair or bad temper. No one knows for sure. Lincoln has promoted General Meade in his place and ordered him to stop Lee's army at all costs. Meade is in charge? Extraordinary. You know something of the generals, do you? The driver asks suspiciously. The professor clears his throat. Only what I read in the newspaper. I know nothing of Meade but his name, really. The driver shrugs. Well, it's not for us to criticize. It is only for us to serve and die as the generals command. They say some of the northern states are near rebellion themselves. New York in particular. They want to end this thing one way or another. These are dark days of the war, a time for dying by the thousands. And for what? To free the slaves? I care nothing for slaves. After that, the driver will speak no more. He waits until his wagon is repaired, then trundles off, silent as the grave. The professor stands in the road, watching as the coffin wagons round the bend and vanish from sight, then pats me on the head. Not to worry, young Mr. Figg. If what the man says is true, the war may be over before your brother has to fight. I hope so. I want Harold to come home. I don't want Harold to come home in a black wagon. Chapter 27. The Mad Balloon Man. One fine day, not far from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the wind brings us a present. We've been hard upon the road since the night before on account of a certain colonel who took exception to the new recruits that were drinking the professor's elixir and sent a squad of lively fellows to arrest us. The professor bribed him with silver coins, but still we had to flee and put many miles between us and before the sun rose. I'm riding in the third wagon with Tally, trying to persuade him to stop and cook us breakfast. They say an army travels on its stomach. I remind him, what about the medicine shows? Don't we travel on our stomachs too? Tally shakes his head, keeps the wagon moving. I believe there's an old leather boot back under the seat, he says. Chew on that if you like. What's that I hear? I say, putting my hand to my ear. Distant thunder. Artillery. No, it's your empty belly. What a lonesome, hungry noise it makes. Pancakes, Tally, fried potatoes, strawberry pie. Strawberry pie? We passed a whole field of strawberries, not a mile back. Fresh strawberries baked in a pie. Good, I say, taunting him by rubbing my stomach. Stop it, you little scamp. We'll have our breakfast when the professor says so and not before. That's when the great black monster comes over the horizon, blown by the warm summer wind. Looks like a giant head making its face as it rises over the grassy hills. Professor, Tally cries, standing up his seat. Look! The wagons halt as an enormous silk balloon fills the sky. The silk bulges and ripples, changing shape with the wind, and it looks like it's alive. As it gets closer, I can make out a basket hanging by ropes and a man in the basket waving frantically and pointing at something. Beneath the basket is another long rope dragging with an anchor. The anchor keeps hitting the ground and bouncing back up in the air. Runaway balloon, Tally says, his eyes lighting up. Bernard, let's grab the anchor. The juggling brothers leap from their wagons and give chase. I follow close behind, striving to keep up. The man shouts from the basket, but he must be 100 feet in the air, and the words are jumbled. We're in a country of rolling hills, running through knee-high grass, chasing an anchor as it tumbles and bounces. Tally gets his hands on the anchor and gives a yell of triumph, and then he yanks into the air and falls tumbling head over heels in the soft grass. Next thing, Bern leaps over his fallen brother and snatches at the anchor. It drags him along and spins him around as the great balloon pops up again, pushed by the wind. Grab my legs, he yells. Somehow I manage to get both arms around his legs. For a moment, the extra weight seems to hold us down, with my toes dragging along the ground. Then another gust lifts us high in the air, and we're both screaming for help. Far below us, Tally is running to keep up, begging us to come down to earth. We would if we could, but the fall is too far. I'm hanging onto Bern's legs for dear life. Then, as the hill below us rises to the ridge, we swing closer to the ground. We're going so fast the grass looks blurry. Look go, Tally yells, pointing. At the top of the hill looms a cluster of tall elm trees. We're headed right for them. The thick branches look like spears rushing at us. I've half a mind to drop and take my chances, but before I can figure out how to let go, we swoosh into the trees. Last thing I see is a branch exactly as fat as my head. The smell wakes me. The delicious smell of sausage cooking in a frying pan and coffee boiling on an open fire. Minnie is holding a cool damp cloth to my forehead, and she smiles when I wake up. Good thing your skull is so thick, she says. It's pure luck your head didn't crack like an egg when it hit that tree. What were you thinking? That you could fly like a bird? Above us, the giant balloon is tethered to an elm tree, bobbing to and fro in the breeze. The anchor has wrapped around the branches. The balloon looks so peaceful you'd never know that when it gets loose, it has a mind to kill the people that it's trying to help. Glad to see you're back in this world, Bern says, bending down to give my nose a tweak. Bern got stove up, mostly scratches, but he expects breakfast to revive him. Tally is busy cooking, using every available frying pan, preparing sausage and egg and fried potatoes and onions and what he calls a surefire pan-fried biscuit. When he notices me sitting up, holding my swollen, achy head, he apologizes for not getting any strawberries. I was willing to go back, he says, but the professor insisted that we stay with the balloon. Whispering, he adds, I think he means to buy it. Sure enough, the professor is deep in conversation with the man who is riding in the basket. He is a young, slender, dandified fellow with a wispy black beard and long, skinny nose and blazing eyes of a true believer. Aeronautics is the future, telling the professor with great enthusiasm. Thaddeus Lowe is living proof. 900 miles in 9 hours. The young man, Dr. Dennett Bobbins by name, explains that Thaddeus Lowe was appointed by President Lincoln to be the chief of Army Aeronautics after Mr. Lowe flew a balloon from Cincinnati, Ohio to Unionville, South Carolina in the aforementioned 9 hours. After a time, his fleet of Army airships flew over the northern part of Virginia, reporting on Confederate positions. Lately, it seems, Confederate sharpshooters and artillerymen have learned how to shoot down the balloons, which do make rather large targets. At 1,000 square yards of silk, Mr. Bobbins raves, 28,000 cubic feet of hydrogen generated on the battlefield, 10,000 feet of cable to tether us in place. From 10,000 feet, you can see the ends of the earth. Tilda and I, the movements of the enemy lose all mystery. Armies can no longer rely upon surprise attacks. I tell you, aeronautics is the future, I say, the future. And then suddenly he commences to sob. Tears stream down his cheeks as Mr. Bobbins tells us that on account of so many unfortunate accidents, an unpredictable wind, and the hydrogen gas catching fire, the entire aeronautical division is to be shut down. Mr. Bobbins' balloon is the last of the fleet, and he has failed to attempt to survey the Potomac Valley and relay intelligence by telegraph to the ground. A summer storm, he wails. I saw a few thunderheads gathering, but gave the order to launch despite the threat of the storms. It is my fault, not Tilda's. It was our last chance to prove the value of our airship, and I failed. I failed most miserably. Oh, Tilda, do forgive me. As the young airship pilot weeps and wails, Professor Fleabottom pats him on the back and comforts him. It's not your fault, my good sir. You can't be responsible for the weather, he assures him. After a time, Mr. Bobbins calms down and accepts a tin mug of coffee from Minerva. The only then seems to take note of his surroundings. Where am I? Precisely, he wants to know. In the general vicinity of Lancaster, the professor informs him. Lancaster, indeed. Then according to my calculations, we covered less than 50 miles. He looks up at the balloon bobbing over the elm tree. She's a good ship, with a will of her own, obviously. Tell us, please, of your great adventure, the professor says, sounding very kind and solicitous. Were you able to survey the Potomac River? Could you discern the Confederate position? Were you able to pass useful intelligence to the Union generals? Young Mr. Bobbins sighs and shakes his head. Alas, no. There were obscuring clouds, and then Just as Tilda and I attained a peak altitude, we broke loose from the cable. Disaster. You keep referring to a woman named Tilda. Had you another companion along the ride? Mr. Bobbins looked shocked at the question. Another companion? No, no, no. The we is Tilda and I. She is my only companion. The balloon? The airship. Oh, of course. Yes, indeed, the airship. Tilda being the name of the airship. The professor concludes thoughtfully. Minnie, would you get Mr. Bobbins a plate of food? I fear his head may somewhat be light from the lack of sustenance or possibly oxygen. 10,000 feet is a very high indeed. The air must be terribly thin. Not so thin as to addle my brain, if that's what you're implying, Mr. Bobbins says, sounding hurt and angry. Nothing of the sort, the professor assures him. Men have always given female names to waterborne ships. Why not ships of the air? Makes perfect sense if you think about it. Tilda, yes, she's a lovely creature. She's not a creature. She's an airship, Mr. Bobbins protests. Of course, an airship. Please take no offense of our ignorance, good sir. We are fascinated with the whole concept of an airship and how they might prove useful to our little traveling enterprise. Aeronautics will change the world, Mr. Bobbins explains, regaining his enthusiasm. There will come a day when all of humanity travels by air. We must learn to control the wind. That's the secret. That's the answer. Once we control the wind, we control the world. Windmills, I suppose, the professor offers cautiously. Is that how you control the wind? The young pilot gives him a disappointed look. You doubt me, but one day it will be true. Humanity will travel by air and conduct war by air and seek peace in the air. The air is the future, not the land. Mankind must be free. It must be unshackled from the slavery of gravity and must be as free as the clouds, like Tilda and me. Air. Do you hear me? Air! Poor Mr. Bobbins is still raving when the cavalry charges over the hill to arrest us all for treason. Dun, dun. So, Tilda is a hot air balloon. The big elephant is war. And Homer has had quite a few adventures going on. Hence the name, The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg. So that was a lot of reading. I hope you stuck with it and you listened as we went by. We're getting close to the end. We've got a few more chapters to go. So I hope you enjoyed it. I miss you. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And I will see you soon. Bye.